For those of you who don't know, Stuttering Craig came back to the internet last year. Yeah, the Screw Attack guy. That was a huge site back in the late 2000s. A whole bunch of old internet shows got their start there. The Angry Video Game Nerd, Pro Jared, I think PBG and JonTron were even on there back in the day too. He's restarted his old Side Scrollers podcast on a new channel, though nowadays the content he covers is somewhat more political than before, as a result of video games themselves becoming more politicized. Well, a catchphrase from this new era of side-scrollers is, "We're just normal men," from this often repeated clip.
We're just normal men.
What do you mean, normal men?
We're just innocent men.
The idea here is that Craig, his co-host Blabs, and the vast majority of his rotating guests, myself included, are regularly called right-wing or Nazi or extremist or alt-right by progressive activists on Twitter. And while Craig has had a few pretty right-leaning figures on the show, not that that's bad or anything, the vast majority of people haven't actually been right-wing. They've all just been normal people, myself included. This whole "we're just normal" idea is striking a chord with people, the same way that Sargon and Academic Agent's sensible centrist thing did last year, though I think this time it's closer to the mark. What they're both appealing to is that the things people in our general sphere of the internet want aren't extreme or far-right or fascist, they're just normal, everyday human things to want. And the people who are labeling us in this way for the crime of wanting them are radicals and revolutionaries. There's several iterations of this meme floating around, but this is the most recent one that I've seen. Know the signs. Is your child an alt-right extremist? If they have an aversion to drugs, alcohol, or porn, an interest in physical fitness, an interest in mental well-being, an interest in classical literature, an interest in monogamous relationships with a desire to procreate, if they increase their time spent outdoors or in nature, if they have an appreciation of nation, history, and culture, or if they have a disdain for the modern or postmodern, your child might have been groomed by YouTubers into being alt-right or something. This isn't a real poster, by the way. It's mocking the idea that what progressives think is alt-right or fascist or far-right is actually just normal, healthy human behavior. But let's see how close satire is to real life. Well, we can check the monogamy and procreation one off right away. I've already spoken several times on this channel about how various progressive groups think that the family itself should be abolished. Sometimes they come at it from a feminist perspective, saying that the nuclear family and traditional gender roles oppress women, that women can only be liberated by emancipating them from motherhood and domestic work. Sometimes they come at it from a socialist perspective, saying that monogamy, exclusivity, closed relationships are a reproduction of capitalist values in the romantic sphere. Capitalism means exclusive ownership of property by an individual, rather than collective access to property for all. Similarly, monogamy means exclusive, closed relationships, only accessible to those people in the relationship, rather than collective access to the whole of human intimacy and sexuality for all. The belief here is that the normal relationship style reinforces capitalist modes of thought by privileging the ideas of exclusivity and privacy over the ideas of inclusivity and public access. This is where you get Vosh's "open relationships are morally superior to monogamy" take, by the way.
I'm going to be over here continuing to argue in favor of the idea that all we do through monogamy is socially normalize, like, possessiveness and insecurity with our partners.
And sometimes they come at it from an egalitarian perspective, saying that wanting children that are biologically related to you, that have your genes, is a eugenicist idea, which makes it Nazism, of course. Additionally, valuing the continuation of your specific family lineage is also considered to be an anti-equal idea. And in a more general sense, simply being a parent has been statistically linked to people becoming more right-wing over time, as they tend to move away from the more libertarian live and let live values of their youth, and more towards values like order, safety, and stability, so that their kids can grow up in a stable environment. My point is, wanting a stable monogamous relationship that eventually leads to marriage and kids is a normal part of the human experience. It is something that the overwhelming majority of people eventually aspire to, and the activists view it as right-wing. Okay, well, what about physical fitness? Turns out, I've already spoken about this one at length too, in my fat activism and fat phobia video. But thankfully, a new article in the same tradition as the old ones just dropped a few days ago. Getting fit is great, but it could turn you into a right-wing jerk. The more self-actualized you become, the higher you are in self-righteousness, blaming other people's problems on their failure to be as healthy as you. Ah, she almost got there. What's actually going on is that getting healthy is empowering. Lifting weights or going on a run isn't just good for you physically, but when you see those results for the first time, when you step on the scale and notice that you've lost weight, when your belt goes down a notch, you realize not just intellectually, but emotionally, you've got this, you can do it. The self-help thing has always been characterized as right-wing due to the bootstraps mentality. Nonetheless, wanting to be physically fit is pretty normal, even if not all of us actually end up achieving it, and the activists think it's right-wing. How about a collection of classical literature? Well, remember a few months ago where the UK's Research, Information and Communications Unit came out with a very long list of signs that someone might be right-wing? Included on that list are owning or reading the historic political theory books Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes, Two Treatises of Government by John Locke, On the Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, and Reflections on the Revolution in France by Edmund Burke, all of which are very important foundational texts when it comes to Enlightenment political thought. Moreover, they also include the authors C.S. Lewis, who wrote Chronicles of Narnia, Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings, Huxley, who wrote Brave New World, Conrad, who wrote Heart of Darkness, and Orwell, who wrote 1984. All of these people wrote way more than this, of course, but the point I'm making is if you've ever read books written by these authors, you're right-wing. Of course, it's not just classical literature that's right-wing now, but anything that is in any way out of date or nostalgic, from British sitcoms to Hallmark movies. I also think I did a video on this back in the day too, why nostalgia is considered fascist by these crazies. However, both nostalgia and appreciation for old pieces of cultural history, as well as just liking specific authors, is a pretty normal thing for people to do, and it's also right-wing. How about aversion to drugs, alcohol, and porn? Does that make you a rightoid? Well, I hate sounding like a broken record at this point, but yeah, I did a video on this too, at least the porn part. A few years back, I covered the progressive backlash against No Nut November, where men who decided not to masturbate for a month were slandered as, you guessed it, right-wing fascists, for not being hedonists, or rejecting the sexual empowerment of OnlyFans women, or fostering discipline in themselves, or whatever the fuck. This one always felt a little bit strange to me, considering that when it comes to, for example, the Stellar Blade conversation, the positions here are reversed. The progressives became the anti-sex crowd during that bit of discourse. But hey, that is where Save Horny comes in after all. As for the other bits, the alcohol and the drugs, it's not hard to find a cornucopia of takes where being straight edge, aka not drinking and not doing drugs, is a form of self-imposed fascism because it consists of strict rules. Yes, that is retarded, but so is everything else we've talked about today. Additionally, considering how much deference progressives give to the drug addicts who line the streets of every major city right now, don't judge their lifestyle, they're not hurting anyone, have compassion for them. It is not surprising that they think being straight edge is being fascist. However, it's a pretty normal thing to not be a drug addict or an alcoholic or a degenerate coomer, and I guess it's also right-wing. God damn, we've already crossed off half of this list. How many more can we get? How about appreciation of nation, history, and culture? Well, this one does tie in with that nostalgia conversation from earlier. A few months back, Sargon posted this picture, where a progressive bought an old 2019 Countryside Memories calendar as a curiosity. He said, images like this depict a world that never existed. They are an idealization of childhood memories. Reactionaries rely on these false images. It is the myth of the once great nation that could be great again. The root of fascism. Sargon's reply to this is the sensible one. A world that never existed, which consists of the English countryside, a van, a woman with a bike, a few sheep, and some people riding horses. How preposterous. Obviously, this is just fascist lies. England was never a pleasant place to live in. We need more diversity. This meme is an American version of the same sentiment. We've probably all seen this floating around already. The 50s were not like this. No one's ever owned a house or a car. No one's ever had a good family or has been happy. This is a reply to a common progressive critique of the 1950s family structure, that it tended to cover up its problems with a veneer of civility. And you know what? Fair enough. I'm not going to sit here and say that there wasn't problems with this ideal, but there were good things along with the bad, and it wasn't a simple, direct improvement with no downsides when society moved away from this family structure. Some good things were gained, but some good things were lost too, and it's a normal impulse to look back and appreciate what might have been, normal and right-wing. While this conversation only really covers the history part of the country, history, and culture, I'm not sure if I actually need to prove the other two. It's pretty common knowledge that progressives view both patriotism towards one's own country and preference for one's own culture as problematic, despite being quite normal. Interest in mental well-being is a strange one. It shows two hands clasped in prayer, so the meme is clearly equating mental well-being with religion or spirituality. There is good reason for that. People who are more religious tend to report better mental well-being, and there's several explanations for why that might be true. Belief in an afterlife or a moral order underpinning the universe might be comforting. The extended social structure that a religious community provides can be an extra resource to draw on during hard times. Nonetheless, progressives don't exactly worship mental disorders. Yeah, they have a shit ton of them, generally whole Twitter bios full of them, and they are constantly talking about going to therapy to try and get better. So it's not like they don't have an interest in mental well-being. They're just failing at fulfilling it. If the meme said is mentally stable instead, I would check it off right away. But as things currently stand, progressives might derive social clout for being mentally ill, to the point that they might even psyop themselves into a mental illness. But I'm not sure they're actually interested in being mentally ill for the sake of the illness, you know? So this one's a half point, I guess. Oh wait, never mind. They don't actually accept the existence of mental illness if it's a man who has it, because men are more privileged. So when push comes to shove, I guess they don't actually care about mental illness that much at all. Increase time spent outdoors? This one has to be a slam dunk, right? Don't the Starbucks-sipping, city-dwelling progressives look down on the small-town country bumpkin rednecks who spend their day working as farmers? Don't they absolutely view campers and hunters and gun culture as a right-wing trait? Well, not everyone is a hunter or a farmer, so even though it's not bad to be these things, it's not exactly normal either. All that being said, it's not hard to find some dumb prog who thinks that outdoor spaces are too white and too straight, because the very fact that a majority group might enjoy a recreational activity means that it has to be racist and sexist and homophobic or something. It's not necessarily normal that people do these things. These are still hobbies that appeal to specific niches after all. But because the people who enjoy these hobbies are otherwise normal, the hobbies themselves must be right-wing. Before tackling the final point of the list, I want to quickly go over a handful of things that are also normal and viewed as right-wing. Wanting your own car is a pretty normal desire, a very common step in the path of adulthood, but that's also a right-wing desire, since it's very individualistic. Plus there's the fact that Ford was a Nazi, Elon Musk is a Nazi, and the Nazis planned the world's first highway system, of course. This one comes from an argument that I had on one of my old Twitter accounts, and it's a take that I've heard many times over the years. Any form of capitalism, even if it's high-tax, wealth-redistributed capitalism with huge safety nets, is right-wing. Caring about the long-term viability of those safety nets is also right-wing as well, especially if you're asking questions about how large amounts of immigration might increase the strain on them. And speaking of immigration, an immigrant gang rape case in Italy has apparently provided fodder for an ascendant far-right, according to CTV News. Why would a gang rape story give fodder to the far right? Surely normal people care about gang rapes not happening in their community. Surely normal people want policies implemented in order to stop gang rapes, not just the far right, right? It seems like there's a lot of normal opinions that are considered right-wing nowadays, isn't there? Which brings us to the final point on that list: disdain for modernism and postmodernism. This one's not too tough. It ties back into the appreciation of old literature or old culture, which we've already covered. If you want a new angle, though, it's very easy to find right-wing accounts that hate on, for example, the decaying concrete block buildings of the Soviet Union, or the uniform glass buildings of modern democracies, both of which are modern forms of architecture, as well as the weirdness that is postmodern architecture, while obviously preferring classical architecture themselves. That is a pretty normal impulse that is often treated as right-wing. This conversation runs a lot deeper, though. The self-defined right-wing influencer Bronze Age Pervert said in a conversation regarding the material abundance of the modern world, "I suppose if you don't feel the daily humiliation of this life, where you're forced on an equality with the unequal, you deserve to be comforted by lobster risotto." This very progressive fellow replied to his remark with, "This reasoning is why right-wing politics boils down to a disgust of equality, a narcissistic belief in their own superiority. You cannot coexist with people like this. There is nothing stopping us from guaranteeing equality of outcome." I asked him directly, why should we? He replied with a simple inequality is bad. And then I asked, if I work harder than you and get more than you, we are unequal in our rewards, but equal in work to reward proportion. Which equality should be privileged? I didn't get a reply to this because of course, but this exchange laid bare something about the progressive mindset. Even if some inequalities are bad, if a blanket disgust of all equality is a right-wing trait, then all things that are normal and good and healthy have now been defined as right-wing. The world is inherently an unequal place, and that's both good and bad. We don't have equal abilities, or equal tastes, or equal desires, or equal motivations, and there's no reason we should have equal rewards, or equal access to each other's lives or relationships. We can make a pretty solid argument as to why, for example, equality before the law is a good idea, but there's large swaths of the human condition that are inherently unequal, and it's good that they are. When Stuttering Craig says, "We're just normal men," in reply to a lot of the insanity that he's seeing in the games industry, he's touching at something that I'm not sure he's fully articulated yet. That's not a dig against him, I like the guy, but just as journalism is his wheelhouse, political theory is mine. The normality that he's reaching towards is pretty vague, but it can be roughly described as a law-abiding, broadly inoffensive, petite bourgeois culture of hard work, meritocracy, upward mobility, and individualism, all of which are cornerstones of the American dream. This culture of normality isn't a bigoted one. All genuine effort is valid, regardless of race or gender or sexuality. But it's also not a woke culture either. There's no free lunch for people who think that historic oppression should entitle them to success. But most importantly, this culture of normality is aligned with what the average person wants for their life. They want to be healthy, physically, mentally, spiritually. They want to be in a committed relationship. They want children. They want a decent job that 1, pays the bills, and 2, contributes to their community in a positive way. They want to live in a society that is not only open and welcoming, but stable and familiar. They want a good balance of independence and social connection, without tilting too far in either direction. And this culture of normality doesn't demand that you must be a straight white male, by the way. This stuff applies to people who aren't straight, or aren't white, or aren't male as well. You can be a black transbian and still want the majority of this stuff. You can still work hard and honestly. You can still be in a committed relationship. You can still contribute positively to your community. You can still be normal, not in all the ways, but in most of them, even as a demographic outsider. But this culture of normality isn't what the progressives want. Return to that list from the beginning. Remember how many of these things they found to be problematic and right-wing, even if they are normal and good? This is a reality that I've been watching a lot of people who are, let's say, center-left, come to terms with rather painfully in the past 8 months. The extremists think that the normal way of life that most people want is right-wing. And when they say right-wing, they mean evil, because the normal is the largest hurdle the revolution has to overcome. That is why neutrality is also right-wing to these people as well, because not taking a position is passively accepting the status quo. Let me really hammer the point home here. Because the progressives want society to radically change, and because the socialists they're in bed with want an actual revolution, whatever is normal must be counter-revolutionary and right-wing. The problem here is that what is normal is also overwhelmingly pretty good stuff, and so they must demonize what most people think is good, what most people want for themselves, and their friends, and their family, and their society. When Stuttering Craig says we're just normal men, he's 100% accurate, but the radicals who hate him and hate his show and the guests he has on, they hear him saying we're just right-wing. They have to, because they think what is normal is the problem. They think it has to be revolted against. Once you understand this, you begin to see it everywhere, even in less political spaces. Let's go back to Craig's wheelhouse once more. Anything that your average nerdy kid or gamer grew up enjoying or wanting in the 90s and 2000s is now right-wing by this metric. Wanting a girlfriend is right-wing. Wanting to own games and physical media rather than a digital license is right-wing. Wanting to goof around with your friends on weekends and say edgy jokes on Xbox Live is right-wing. Enjoying attractive women in your shows, movies, or games is right-wing. The entire cultural zeitgeist that Screw Attack existed in during its heyday is now right-wing. And this isn't even mentioning any other subculture that exists out there, let alone academic spaces, or big business, or government, or journalism, or anything else. But this idea maps onto all of them with a reasonable amount of accuracy. The progressives have become insane enough that everything normal about human existence, everything that most people like and want and actively work towards, has now been placed firmly in the right-wing camp. That does not bode well for them long term.